So there's been a lot of talk recently of Battlefield 6 dying and losing most of its player base. But is it really as bad as people make it out to be? Do we need to be worried about the future of the game? Is it worth keeping on your hard drive? And just why has the player base fallen off so drastically? I think these are all questions that need to be answered, so let's look into it, shall we? As always, if you guys enjoy the content here on the channel, hit the sub button to stay up to date with all the Battlefield 6 news, and thank you guys as always for your support. So it's no secret that Battlefield 6 has seen a pretty steep decline in players. On Steam, its all-time peak was 747,440 players, and now we're maxing out at around 124,000 per day, and in fact today it dropped below 100,000 for the first time, meaning that we've lost about 80 to 85% of the total player base since launch, and a lot of people are dooming and glooming and sort of acting like this is the end of the game. But I want to be the first to tell you, I really don't think it's dying, guys, at least not yet. Now, it may be a cause to worry, but this is the largest, most healthy player base that any Battlefield game has seen on Steam ever. And when you consider all the people playing on other storefronts like the EA app or consoles, the player base is actually much larger than you think. However, I also can't deny that there must be valid reasons for losing over 80% of your player base in less than 3 months. Ark Raiders, that saw a similar release window, is still doing incredibly well, even when compared to its launch numbers. And that, to me, that indicates that Battlefield 6 doesn't quite have the replayability that we've come to expect from Battlefield games for a lot of players, or there are problems with the game that are causing people to leave. So why is this? So as far as I can tell, there are 3 main problems that I can see with Battlefield 6 so far. There is a lack of content, like maps that, keeps the player base engaged, a lack of depth to the gameplay, which usually offers almost endless hours of content, but in Battlefield 6 is surprisingly shallow, and then there's all these smaller issues with the game that, in my opinion, DICE are just taking way too long to fix and put right. So firstly, content. For the majority of players, content means maps, and long gone are the days of premium, unfortunately, where we would receive 4 new maps every couple of months, each with their own theme, keeping the game fresh and, adding to the overall pool of playable content. I think it's fair to say that Battlefield 6's launch maps, they're pretty hit and miss. They're not the worst in the franchise's history, but they're far from the best. Some of them were received fairly positively, like Siege of Cairo, which you can see why DICE put that one front and center whilst promoting the game, and others, like Sobek City or Empire State, they got a lot of flack for being too small, too sweaty, and generally unenjoyable. At this point, I think a lot of players will just outright skip maps or use the search function to not queue into maps that they don't like to play, and the same thing goes for Breakthrough. I think a lot of maps just suck on Breakthrough, and so I find myself skipping a decent amount there as well. And so all in all, most players probably only have like 5 decent maps that they actually want to play through. Now, we did get 2 new maps with Season 1, one of them, Eastwood, I thought was very enjoyable and a good addition to the game, but the other one, Blackwell Fields, really didn't hit the mark. So, with a lack of enjoyable maps and few weapons being added there really isn't that much for players to stick around for. However, I would argue that it's actually the lack of vertical content or the absence of any meaningful depth to the gameplay that is actually causing players to fall off incredibly fast. If we look back, I think something that kept games like Battlefield 4 alive for so long and the player retention high was the crazy skill ceiling for all parts of the game. As an example, back then I chose to make content about the jets because there was just so much to talk about and so much to learn, and every time I learned something I'd make a little video on it, and ultimately that became the start of this channel. At some point, I thought I'd gotten pretty good in the jets, but eventually I discovered there were entire communities that revolved around dogfighting in the jets, like literally just that one aspect of the game, and sure enough, I would get absolutely destroyed by somebody far more advanced than myself. And that encouraged me to learn more. And then there was a whole world of things to learn for helicopters or infantry play, along with their own communities. Like, you literally couldn't be the best at everything because you'd spread yourself too thin and there were just always these dedicated players in each sector of the game. And it's that content, that depth of endless things to be learned and mastered that has kept Battlefield 4 alive to this very day. That was the fun that at least I derived from the game. But Battlefield titles have been heading in a steady direction that reduces skill expression and over-casualizes the game for a long time now. And it's clear that they are instead opting for FOMO-style content like arbitrary assignments, battle passes, and ticking boxes over real depth. An ocean with the depth of a paddling pool, if you will. Although I suppose there's not really enough horizontal content in the game to call it an ocean, so I guess it's more like a pond with the depth of a paddling pool, but you get what I mean. The point is, I think players are struggling to find something to play for, and as a few examples of things that have been majorly casualized, RPGs are basically child's play, and they have very little drop. They have much faster flight times if you go and compare them to the RPGs of Battlefield 4. Same thing with the tow missiles. They're way too responsive, way too slow, and it makes them incredibly easy to use, so much so that anybody can hit tow missiles on air vehicles. The sniper rifles now have this new sweet spot, and they've got the rangefinder that takes all of the sort of guesswork of the bullet drop and does all the work for you. Vehicles, they have just been casualized beyond belief since Battlefield 4, especially the air vehicles, and the list goes on. And for me, the irony of this situation is all of those cool, Battlefield moments that EA and DICE highly covet and love to market to us, by the way, they've been so trivialized by the lack of skill depth that they're basically every game occurrences now. So much so, in fact, that Battlefield top plays, which used to be incredibly popular, is pretty much dead. They just aren't impressive anymore. You know, I remember watching, or maybe even performing if I was lucky, Battlefield 4 clips and hitting the RPG across the map, or that crazy tow missile, or the Rondazook, or the mid-air JDAM on an enemy jet, or whatever it was, and those were actually impressive feats in that game. Now, that being said, I don't think we'll see things return to the way they are. This is just kind of the line that they've taken now, and in some ways, it's simply the current state of the industry that they create in as well. Clearly, casualizing the game and having it appear to a wide audience has worked wonders for them. You know, it was the best-selling game of 2025, and they made an absolute killing on it. And with Battlefield titles rumored to be annual releases, I think that's probably the way things will look going into the future. You know, you get your new Battlefield game, you unlock everything, you play all the content, it's an immersive, bombastic war experience with jets flying overhead and blowing up in the sky, and then after a couple of months when the honeymoon phase is over and you realise that without any depth there's nothing left to do, you just move on to the next game. EA are happy that they've made their money at launch, and next year they'll sell you another one. And after Vince Zampella tragically passed away before Christmas just recently, you know, he'd been talking about creating this big Battlefield universe and whatnot, and we still don't really know what that means, but now it basically leaves Byron Bede at the helm, and he is of course known for Warzone, Call of Duty, and is probably directly responsible for injecting much of Call of Duty's DNA into Battlefield 6, including the aforementioned rumoured plan to turn Battlefield into an annual release, and then of course RedSec, the new BR mode. So I think the lack of skill depth really just leaves players with, you know, nothing to play for except new maps, new battle pass progression, and etc. And if there's none of that left, like you've completed the battle pass, all the challenges, you've unlocked the weapons, and you've played the maps, I feel like there's just not much left to play for, the same as we had in other Battlefield titles. And then if you add to that the litany of issues the game has, from progression being too slow, especially weapon progression, to the lack of, you know, a proper server browser with official server support, Portal being neglected and the community experiences not being highlighted, all the way through to the atrocious Netflix-style main menu, the bad hit reg and netcode, the lack of an air radar for jets and loadouts, and the list goes on. Now that being said, Season 2 should be starting up in a few weeks, and we will likely hear something about it very soon. So far, data mining has actually told us that it will include the Little Bird, several new weapons, and even some gadgets, presumably maps too, but we don't really have any details there yet. I will make sure to bring you guys a video on that, so, you know, if you haven't already, make sure you do sub to the channel to stay up to date with that one. Question is, how many people is Season 2 going to bring back? How many people are going to stick around for it? And how long is it going to last until people get bored again? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I would love to get your takes on this. If you enjoyed today's video, a like is always appreciated. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.